Hi, I've been asked by one of the viewers to give a tutorial on painting trees with the hake. Quite difficult. It's one of those brushes that you have to really get used to by doing lots and lots of work with it. It does hold huge amounts of water if you're not wary about it, and it has a habit of flooding onto the main picture. So one of the easiest ways to remove some of that water when you know it's there is to use a piece of cloth, just a wodge, or don't put so much on the brush. It's better probably to be too dry rather than too wet, but it's a matter of experience. And skies are very simple with wetting wet, by wetting the whole paper first with some clean water, and very, very simple to flood in some colours and let gravity do the rest. Now normally we wouldn't work with the paper upright such as this. We'd normally work on a 30 degree, 20 degree angle, but it's entirely up to you. I'm practicing doing like this because I have to give some professional demonstrations, and if they haven't got any video equipment to project on a screen, the audience have to see what I'm doing. But for the purpose of this demonstration and the others that I'm doing for you on YouTube, we'll work like this. I'll show you one or two recent watercolours. Now I've only gone back to watercolour about 6-7 weeks ago, before Christmas, because a friend wanted some help with her watercolours, and I've been doing oils for many years, and it's much easier to correct and change and fiddle and poke with oils because it's an opaque medium. Watercolour, once it's on, it's not impossible to move, but it's better to let it to paint it first and leave it. But these are some simple sketchy sort of watercolours I did with beech trees, trees with ivy on, a bit of a snow scene. But trees, you can take liberties with trees as you can with skies. A lot of my trees are fantasy. I just make them up. I'm not copying anything, I'm just doing them. I'm just having fun with the brush. There's another one of the same sort of view. Beech trees again, but really beech trees are quite greeny. But we're artists, we're not photographers. We can do what we want. It's our paint. Here's another simple one. This is one from a Ron Ranson book showing ivy. And what happens when you get carried away doing one tree, you do another one exactly like it from behind. You have to guard against that. You don't notice it when you're doing it. It seems to be a sort of a mental blank, but it happens. And this one is a simple one of silver birches, and they're beautiful trees to paint. And those who have been following these videos, and Steve Cronin's, know that we're following the Ron Ranson ideas that he developed many, many years ago when he discovered the hake brush. And he kept painting as simple as possible by using a few colours, 7, alizarin crimson, light red, ultramarine, burnt umber, Payne's grey, lemon yellow, and raw sienna. And you, of course, can use whatever colours you want, whatever works for you. There's no rules in it, other than good practice. So I'm going to start in a normal way with the hake, if I can find it. Here we are. The 2-inch hake. I'm going to wet the paper because that's the basis of what we're doing. It is wetting the paper first and painting wet in wet as it dries. And then maybe after this we'll do one on dry paper just to show the difference. This is just one way of painting watercolour, and a way where you can do very, very good, quick, impressionist skies with a minimum of effort and hope for the best. Also, by doing this, the paper expands uniformly. Alright, I better cover my computer screen now, or the keyboard, otherwise I'll paint that as well. So nice and wet, but not so wet that it's running down your board. Just do this till it soaks in a bit. I'm not going to do a full landscape here. I'm just going to do some trees. We'll just let that expand for a minute, and I'll explain one or two other things. It's good to go out and sketch from nature with a pen, pencil, charcoal, carbon pencils, carpenter's pencils, anything that makes a mark. Things like this, graphite pencils, they come much thicker than that, and I prefer much thicker lines. It makes it quite a bit easier and more impressionist. If you work with hard pencils, it's very, very difficult to blend and to merge and to create an impressionist effect. But there again, there are many ways of painting. Different people like different things. Some people like to paint and are clever enough, or at least have the patience to be able to draw and paint photographically. I don't. It doesn't interest me. It's not what I do. One painter that I'll tell you about. There's an English painter by the name of Edward Wesson, and he died, I think, in the 1970s. And I believe I saw one of his last professional demonstrations for Carshalton and Wallington Art Group, which was my local group, and I was a member for many years, but I'm not now. I can't remember why. Nothing personal. It was just I probably came to the end of what I could get out of my involvement with the group. But he would demonstrate using this brush, the polisher's mark, French polisher, made from squirrel hair. I bought this in France. They're not cheap, but they're very, very good. And when they're wet, you can get a very, very nice point with it. And you can do very fine rigger type strokes, or you can do whole washes. But he was a master at it. It's what you get used to. It's no good buying all the stuff that is available in art stores and hoping to do a masterpiece. This brush is a crazy brush. It's soft, it holds lots of water, it splits, it breaks, it does all sorts of things you don't want it to do until you want it to do them, because in splitting it gives a randomness approach. By doing that with the brush, by drying it and opening up all the little bristles, well, they're not really bristles, they're quite soft, you can stipple with it. Or when it's a little bit wet, and you can fashion it to a knife edge, and you can do all your little tiny bits. You can use bits of this brush, tiny bits. You can use the belly of it there when the brush is nearly dry, to dry brush, where it just catches the high spots of the paper and gives a sparkle that you can't get in any other way. It's a wonderful thing. It's really worth persevering with. You've got to spend quite a lot of money on paper and be prepared to waste it. That's the price we pay in material. And failing that, if you are an oil or acrylic painter, all your waste paper sheets that have got paintings on both sides that have failed, don't throw them away. Keep them flat, and you can use them later for oil paintings and acrylic paintings. They're wonderful, wonderful supports for that type of painting. Watercolour paper is very durable. It's not made from wood pulp, it's made from linen or rag, and will last for centuries. Constable did a lot of oil sketches on watercolour paper, and they're as fresh today as they were when he painted them. And some of his great paintings were Impressionist style, and some attribute the foundation of, or the inspiration for Impressionism to Constable, because so many people are brought up on his finished paintings that were for the Royal Academy, and had to have a degree of finish that you wouldn't normally get if you were just doing it for yourself or for a client. But his sketches are very, very loosely painted, and they are absolutely gorgeous, and you can't believe that they were done 200 years ago. So just that's a tip. So you don't have to waste your watercolour paper, you can just recycle it. Right, the paper is quite dry. Another thing about paper, when the paper's wet, you can do anything with it. But when it starts to dry off, when the water starts to dry into the painting or into the paper and goes dull, it's quite critical, because if you hit it with the wrong amount of water, then you'll get the cauliflowers, all those horrible where the paint sort of moves to like a puddle and then just congeals and makes a horrible mess. So, but you can overcome that to a certain extent by using thicker paint or drier paint than what's actually on the surface of the paper. So let's just start with a tree grey made from ultramarine and burnt umber. Fairly dry brush, but not so dry that it splits like that. So what I'm going to do now is just dip it into the water. My webcam is fixed. It's fixed to a boom made from a little bit of framing and masking tape and held in place. So I've got to be careful don't jog it. Right. So there's a sort of colour. It's a warm grey. So starting thick at the bottom. Just dab the brush. Don't draw with the brush. Just dab. And I'm using the tip and just about a quarter of an inch down, the sort of belly, the beginning of the belly, and get some branches. You can thicken them up, just get them in. And it's an impression of a tree. It's not a species. It probably doesn't exist, this sort of tree. But people looking at it maybe haven't got your degree of sophistication, or in other words, they're not used to looking at what's around them, as we are. We're always looking for lights and darks and things to paint. So don't worry about their degree of sophistication, which is in a lot of cases less than yours, because you're an artist. Look, bits coming out of the base. And then you could just anchor it into the landscape by doing some of this. It's wet at the bottom because the gravity has made the water go down to the bottom. Obviously, I know, but so that's one tree, and then when that's dry, I'll show you how to quickly do a method of painting lots of twigs without actually doing them with a brush, with a rigger. I tend to leave the rigger to last, and sometimes all I'll use it for is the signature. There are so many aspects to painting landscape. There if you want to do buildings in a landscape setback to give scale to a mountain or to a hill, then paint the background dark, and when it's bone dry, just dislodge the paint with a smaller flat brush that's damp, go work on it, and then blot it out with a bit of tissue paper. That will leave more or less the paper white again, and then you can paint back into it. That's how you do sails on sailing boats on lakes. Very easy, but you have to counter change light against dark, and you have to create the light by soaking out, by blotting, or by leaving white. With wet in wet, it's difficult to leave areas of white where you want them because of the gravity of the water pulling down all the time. But there are other ways of painting by leaving the paper dry, putting the paint on, and then just putting water back into the edge of the colour and dragging it around the well, like this. Well, that's wet, but with a bit more water you can go into that paint and drag it down. It would work better on dry paper because that's wet, but you can keep areas light, and then when it's bone dry again you can go over it again with clouds, but leave it till it's bone dry. Once you put the paint on, leave it, don't fiddle around with it too much. And then while it's like that, you can just flick in some grass and a bit of texture, anything that makes the painting a bit more interesting. Now we'll try and do a silver birch. Now silver birch, you've got a very light grey with warm bark areas where it's peeling away from the tree. So blue is very good for this grey. And the branches of silver birches are very fine. they sort of come out at little angles and dark. They're dark where the bark has peeled and exposed the tree underneath. And burnt umber and a bit of Payne's grey for the darks, and just use the tip of the brush here, just things like that. Black, bit of black, or a bit of grey, Payne's grey. And while it's like that, you can get your bit of plastic card, and you can scrape to show the lighter bark. It's a bit of texture. You can overdo this, but I'm just showing as an example what you can do to lighten it again, having put it on. We can let that go. But it's another good grey, the range of greys, is using the ultramarine with the light red. And you can use less of the Payne's grey, use the burnt umber and the ultramarine blue. Try and leave some lighter areas, and then for the darks you can use burnt umber and ultramarine. That's probably better than the Payne's grey. Payne's grey does tend to be a dead colour. It's a shortcut, and there you can devise better ways to do the darks like that. Anchor these things. Just have fun with this brush. Don't take it too seriously. We all have disasters and waste a lot of paper. You have off days. But one bit of advice I've always followed is to paint even when you don't feel like painting. All this waiting for inspiration to come is a load of old rubbish. If you're painting for money, as I have done in the past, it's a job like everything else, and you have to make yourself do it. And you paint through you paint yourself into enlightened areas. I've been sitting at my easel with paints doing a load of Venice paintings. So I was commissioned to do some years ago for a very, very nice gallery. It was like painting by numbers after about 3 months, because I was just recycling Antoine Bouvard stuff. But it sold, and I was sitting there one day, or several times, where things were going well, and I was listening to some classical music on the radio, and all of a sudden I just lost myself, totally lost myself. It was a marvellous, like, heightened experience, heightened awareness experience. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, and all because you make yourself do it even when you don't feel like it. Right, okay, now I was going to show you just how to do some ends of branches. We're going to leave winter and spring and autumn trees to another time. But winter trees are beautiful. You can see the skeletons. Look, I'm just using that bit of the brush there. Look, I hope you can see this better than before, because the person that asked me to do this suggested that I move my little camera to over my left shoulder so that you can see what I'm doing with my right hand. Look, you can create the impression that there's a lot going on there, and remember that branches come forward and they go backwards. And if you really want to be correct, you could create an illusion of depth in a warm tree by just doing some blue or bluey grey behind it, and that'll give an impression of the branches going away from the other side of the tree, and then warmer ones coming towards you. You've got to try to create an impression of 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional bit of paper, And you do that with colour, and we also do it with size of objects. That as they go away, they get smaller and they get more and more distinct, and that's why we paint wet in wet, because you can do that very simply once you get used to the brush. Now, I did say that I'd do this breaking up of the bristles on the brush, and with the palette grey, which is all the stuff that is a little bit damp, you can, and silver birches, the leaves are very small, and you've got to look on trees in winter for the few little leaves that are left after the autumn fall. But you do that with any colour you like, a bit of grassy stuff. So haven't used the rigger, but they're trees. That's not a very good example, these aren't, but I'm doing that for you, not for me. But you, I hope, get the idea of what I'm trying to do. But a little goes a long way. Don't overdo. Better to leave it understated than poke and prod it to death. So there we are. That's a short tutorial on how I approach trees. There are many other ways, but there's no substitute for a lot of practice. Keep at it. It does cost money in use of paper, but you've got to do it. You're not going to produce a masterpiece by doing this for, say, a couple of weeks and having all the lovely brushes and everything else. It can take years, and you never ever get as good as you want to be. You never ever get there. You can always get better, and you can always learn. Okay, thanks for listening. I hope that was of help. See you soon.